Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by GrandTheftWorld.com. It's August 28th, 2022. This is episode 95. Last week's episode was called The Fauci Effect, and the world found out what the Fauci Effect is. It's a disappearing act. Fauci resigned effective this past week.
We all know him from seeing him on TV and hearing his pronouncements for the entire country. But as an infectious disease specialist, what difference has he made in your life?
I mean, in one word, he's a legend. I mean, to many of us kind of on the younger end of the infectious disease specialists, he's someone that we've always looked up to. He's a trusted source of information. We hear him speak at, national conferences for our field. And he is really a role model for all of us.
Having been the target of this kind of really specific, really different attack, do you have insight into what we ought to do to protect public officials like yourself and to try to be more rational about this stuff as a country?
Rachel, I wish I did have a positive, constructive answer for you, but I don't. I think you and I are talking about public health issues right now. But what has spilled over and really in many respects impeded a proper response to a public health challenge is something that we see that goes well beyond public health. It's a complete distortion of reality. I mean, a world of where untruths have almost become normalized, how we can see something in front of our very eyes and deny it's happening.
I'll say his legacy is presiding over the greatest debacle in public health history, because his recommendations were implemented, and those implementations of the lockdowns and the school closures that he recommended, along with his underling, Dr. Birx, failed. They failed by the data to stop the spread of the infection. They failed to stop the known vulnerable to die from dying, and they inflicted enormous harms. They spared the affluent and the elite at the sacrifice of the poor, minorities, and our children.
But the worst part to me is the lie, and that is, don't we now know for a fact that NIH money, taxpayer dollars, went to fund this Wuhan virology lab?
Unless Dr. Fauci, retirement or not, decides to seek asylum in some remote, obscure foreign country, then Dr. Fauci, retirement or not, is going to be spending a lot of time in front of a congressional committee and committees. We're going to ask him questions about gain-of-function research, why he didn't push back on China's lies, why he pushed back so hard on the possibility, which we know is now real, that the virus originated in a Chinese lab.
The only reason I'm not grilling Fauci is he never comes before my committees. If he came before my committees, I would be asking him some tough questions, because I've written him, Del, I'm up to 43 oversight letters on this.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, we need to find out.
His legacy really is the extraordinary distrust now in the public of our public health agencies. I mean, this is critical and very harmful to the future crises, but also to the institutions themselves that we need to trust as people.
The American people have many, many questions about how Dr. Fauci handled the pandemic.
Do you regret particularly the last one, the shutdown, the sweeping shutdown that some said made things worse?
No, I don't, Neil. And in fact, I think we need to make sure that your listeners understand I didn't shut down anything. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down.
And the only way to do that is by draconian means of essentially shutting down a country. We know that we can do that if we shut down.
Well, I think one of the things you really need to do, to the extent that you can shut down temporarily the country, I think is important.
Well, if I knew at the time that shutting down would have such a dramatic effect on controlling the spread, obviously we would have shut down earlier. There are those who say you shut down, you do destructive things by disrupting the economy. And others say, well, if you save so many infections by shutting down,
Why didn't you shut down 2 weeks earlier? But I don't regret saying that the only way we could have really stopped the explosion of infection was by essentially, I want to say shutting down. I mean, essentially having the physical separation and the kinds of recommendations that we've made.
You've been a big fan of Cuomo and the shutdown in New York. You've lauded New York for their policy. New York had the highest death rate in the world. How could we possibly be jumping up and down and saying, oh, Governor Cuomo did a great job? He had the worst death rate in the world.
No, you misconstrued that, Senator.
And you would have thought that would have been the big news of this week, but no, there's so much news going on this week that we will be here for the next 6 or 7 hours, breaking it open, analyzing, deep diving, getting into primary documents and sources. We've got stories like the unveiling, the releasing of the Mar-a-Lago affidavit, which if you are, for those of you playing at home, it was mostly redacted, heavily redacted. And that brought a lot of questions as to what's redacted and why things get redacted and what happens if those things were unredacted. Would people be able to make a more informed decision from those unredacted parts? We got 14 FBI whistleblowers come out with respect to the Mar-a-Lago raid.
The highly anticipated Trump raid search warrant affidavit finally gets released. And if we could actually read more about the supposed probable cause, we could fact check all those leaks. But as you can see, well, there's not a lot to see. As the Liberty Daily points out, the FBI affidavit is so redacted, they even redacted their reasons for redacting what they redacted. We did learn the agency used media articles to justify the raid. Sean Davis, Biden's DOJ told a federal court that the FBI had to raid Trump's house because a CBS News article saw trucks at Mar-a-Lago when Trump was president. And was Biden lying when he said he had no prior knowledge of the raid?
President, how much advance notice did you have of the FBI's plan to search Mar-a-Lago?
I didn't have any advance notice. None. Zero. Not one single bit. Thank you.
Memos obtained by Just the News show then White House Deputy Counsel Jonathan Su was engaged in conversations with the FBI, DOJ, and National Archives as early as April and had received Biden's blessing to remove the former president's protective claim of privilege. Just the News reports even more whistleblowers are coming forward with misconduct claims against the FBI. One claiming FBI officials instructed agents not to investigate Hunter Biden's laptop ahead of the 2020 presidential election, according to Senator Ron Johnson.
So we'll find out. There's also more movement from the World Economic Forum on why you should eat the bugs. Klaus Schwab's going to talk about eating the bugs throughout this episode. I'm sure we have a clip from Greg Reese, which illustrates why maybe not eating the bugs would be good for humanity, good for freedom, good for you at home. So we'll leave that for your consideration.
We are being told that we must stop eating beef because the methane produced by cattle burps and farts is accelerating global warming. So let's look at the science. Mass balance calculations take into account material being added, exchanged, and lost during natural processes. And Australian geologist Ian Plimer breaks down this science in Eat Beef, Save the Planet. Grass, along with most plant life, consumes carbon dioxide from the air as food. The more CO2, the greener the environment. So the theory that CO2 levels are hurting the environment is flawed from the start. But for the sake of argument, we can examine the science and see if cow farts actually are increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere. The grass consumes CO2 from the air, and when it dies, methane is released, which quickly separates into CO2 and water vapor. When the grass is eaten by cattle, this carbon is recycled in various ways. Cattle waste fertilizes the grass with some of this carbon, and the rest is stored in meat, milk, blood, intestines, bones, and skin. Thanks to the cattle, carbon is taken from the grass and used as fertilizer, stored in leather goods, and consumed as food, where most of it stays with the body until death. And so the processes of meat production and consumption actually removes carbon from the atmosphere and recycles it elsewhere. Humans, cattle, and grass are all parts of the same natural ecosystem, and carbon is the building block. The entire anti-meat agenda is built upon lies. Grass-fed beef is so nutritious that an all-beef diet has become a very popular choice for people cleansing and healing from several ailments and disease. Humans are omnivores, and that means we have the ability to survive on both plants and animals. Our teeth are able to cut and masticate animal flesh, and we have the digestive enzyme trypsin for breaking down meat, which has allowed the human brain to grow larger over time, allows us to grow stronger, and operate more efficiently. Many people eat vegetarian diets because they believe that eating meat is immoral. This argument is taught like a religion, with the main rule being don't eat anything with a face, which doesn't make any sense. What about the millions of microorganisms we consume in a single glass of water? Do they not deserve the same respect? Experiments with plants and vegetables show how they feel pain and recognize the person who hurt them. Do they not deserve the same respect simply because they have no face? A simple law of the physical natural world is that life is sustained by life. Every living thing sustains its own life by consuming other living things. This is true of the carnivore, the omnivore, and the vegan. The moral argument of veganism is just another ego trip. Many are learning veganism from modern yoga teachers, as if it were an ancient religion. But this is a myth. The cow was sacred in traditional yoga because it sustained life. Vegetarianism was only promoted among the lower castes so that enough meat was available to the warrior and priest classes. And that's all that's happening today. The all-powerful 0.1% want us lower castes to eat bugs while they save the best for themselves. But it's even worse than that. They want us all to get sick and die. In an evaluation of edible insects and the transmission of parasitic diseases, 1/3 of all insects studied were found to be pathogenic to humans. And most insects contain chitin, which is a modified polysaccharide present in most insects and absent in all mammals. We cannot digest it, and it is known to cause several health issues with humans who consume it, including respiratory issues and the accelerated growth of cancer cells. The real problem isn't beef consumption, it's factory farming, and we can solve this by incentivizing local grass-fed cattle farming.
Also, getting to the bigger story this week, Mark Zuckerberg went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he said the quiet part out loud. He let the cat out of the bag. He admitted that there was FBI persuasion at Facebook. They said, look, there's going to be some information coming out. We're going to tell you it's Russian propaganda. And then to back that up, the FBI and all the other intelligence directors, they came out and said, hey, here's 50 people saying it's Russian propaganda. I think there's a lot of heavy questions to be asked, and they started flying as soon as that clip started circulating.
This is a Fox News alert, and we're not overselling that. This actually is a blockbuster story. So the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, just went on the Joe Rogan podcast. And while speaking to Rogan, he admitted that Facebook censored the New York Post's accurate reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop, which of course we all knew, but that Facebook did that because the FBI intervened and told Facebook that that laptop was Russian disinformation. And of course, how would Zuckerberg know? They believe the FBI. Now, keep in mind, the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop when they said that. They've had it since 2019. So when the FBI told Facebook that on the eve of a presidential election, they knew it was a lie. They interfered in the last presidential election. If ever there was an attack on democracy, it's the country's largest law enforcement agency weighing in a dishonest way 3 weeks before the voting begins. Here's a clip.
There was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
Yeah, we had that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant.
So the FBI censored the story, just to recap, in case you didn't live in this country prior to 2 years ago, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. That is election interference. That is an attack on democracy by our most powerful domestic government agency. It's unbelievable. It defies belief. We actually put in a request to Facebook to see the communications from the FBI to Facebook. We have a right to see it. We hope that they'll send them to us. Keep in mind that in October of 2020, a Facebook executive and Democratic Party operative called Andy Stone claimed that Facebook was blocking the story, quote, as part of our standard process to reduce the spread of misinformation. So they didn't tell us that the FBI had told them it was Russian disinformation. Again, when the FBI knew perfectly well that it wasn't.
Let's go to Luke Rudowski and let's see his summary of this week's news.
Looks like things are going very well for the people of Philadelphia, and someone left a very important comment underneath this video saying specifically, for the government to exist, the people must suffer. The bigger the suffering, the bigger the government, and I think that's been true almost everywhere.
What makes Autonomy uniquely empowering? Autonomy is a self-help course unlike any other. Over the course of our 12-week program, you'll experience weekly live lectures from Richard Grove, specifically designed to equip you with the skills you need to set yourself free. Free from the learned helplessness taught in our schools, free from the dependence on a corrupt system that serves only to uphold the rich, free from the structure of your 9-to-5 if that's your prerogative. Plus, you'll enter into a community of like-minded individuals who are pursuing the same freedom you are, and who'll support you and learn alongside you every step of the way. A lifetime of community and the tools to live however you want. We can't wait to meet you. Learn more at getautonomy.info.